So there I am. So this evening we're moving on to the second stage, as it were, of the system of practice, the mandalas of practice, that we've been looking at for a couple of weeks, looking at the theme of positive emotion. Now, I'm pretty nervous, probably a little bit more nervous than usual, because I'm going to be attempting to actually talk and lead things from experience. And the problem with doing that, of course, is that I only have my experience to go by, to judge the effectiveness or usefulness of something. Yeah, basically, I have no idea, and I cannot really possibly, short of some kind of major psychic power, have any idea what any of your experience is. And that goes for everybody else who isn't me all of the time. Yeah, so your experience is a complete mystery to me. Yeah, I can assume that there are certain sort of areas that we have in common, certain things upon which we can all agree. But beyond that, what I'm going to kind of talk about and lead through may not resonate with you at all. But that's just a risk that I guess one has to take when one's talking from experience. But what it does highlight, I think, and this is something which is important for positive emotion, is the need for imagination. Yeah, the need for imagination to bridge that experience gap, to bridge that sense of separation. Now, I read a book recently called *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari, which is an extremely interesting book about the evolution of our species. And he says that about 70,000 years ago, some kind of cognitive leap took place in the way the human brain was wired, which gave rise to speech. And it gave rise to the ability to conceptualize and to create fictions and myths, to actually see things that aren't there. Yeah. So prior to that, pretty much any animal with senses would be able to see and sense its immediate environment, but it probably wouldn't be able to imagine that environment, if it was somewhere else. That would have got for early human beings too. But at some point, humans developed this ability to do fiction, to create myths, and that's what's enabled human beings to organize and in incredibly large numbers and create complex things like culture and societies. So fictions like the nation state, limited liability companies is something he cites. The idea of laws, money, commerce, all of these things which don't actually exist except through a common understanding, which is created by our ability to share in collective myths and fictions. So in other words, it's like imagination. So imagination is a sort of crucial human ability to see and kind of feel beyond what is immediately present. Without it, we wouldn't be able to thrive in the numbers that we do and organize ourselves. So there's an important appeal to the importance of imagination. And I'm going to quote something that Shelley wrote, the poet Shelley, which is very well known to most people who've been around Jayaratna for any length of time. And it's also about imagination. And it's called The Great Secret of Morals. So there's a connection to start with. And he says, the great secret of morals is love, or a going out of our own nature, and an identification of ourselves with the beautiful which exists in thought, action, or person, not our own. A man, to be greatly good, must imagine intensely and comprehensively. He must put himself in the place of another, and of many others. The pains and pleasures of his species must become his own. So in other words, he's talking about the Metta Bhavana, yeah, and the importance of imagination in the Metta Bhavana, that ability to imagine outside our own skins, outside our own experience, to imaginatively identify with the experience, with the pains and pleasures of other people. So that's something which I'm hoping to touch on this evening through practice. Yeah. So there's a lot of talk in Buddhism about views. Yeah, that we have views that sort of kind of hamstring us and in various ways and can be a problem for us. And one of those views is something that's called Satkaya Drishti. So Satkaya Drishti could be translated as, well, basically it's the view of the separate existence of the person. Yeah, so, you know, basically my view is that I'm sitting here kind of within my skin, in my own little kind of boundaried world, looking out at all of you, sitting in your own skins, in your own little boundaried worlds, so to speak, with some kind of gulf between us, like a sort of vacuum or empty space or something almost that between us. Yeah. So there's that kind of, there's a strong sense of boundariedness that we may particularly notice when it gets threatened, when somebody gets too close to us or does something we don't like. We feel threatened or put out or whatever negative emotion you might think of. That sense of being boundaried, of being kind of me in here, can be very strongly reinforced. So a lot of the kind of nitty gritty of Buddhist practice is working with that view to how can we replace this strongly boundaried sense of ourselves, which restricts our ability to empathize, to go out, to identify, to go out of our own nature, as Shelley has it, to empathize with other beings. So how can we work with that? Yeah. So I'm going to. I've been very kind of intrigued, partly as a result of one of the workshops that Tejananda did, about what our sense of our actual experience of being boundaried is. And in actual experience, are we quite as tightly boundaried as we think we are? So I'm just going to approach that a little bit in just little kind of snippets of practice. Yeah. And it will lead into a kind of, it will make sense in the context of positive emotion. At least I'm hoping that it will. Yeah. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just lift up your hand and have a good look at it. Okay. So just have a good look. Take your hand in. And I think you'll probably agree that looking at your hand is pretty clearly delineated, isn't it? It's pretty clearly delimited. There's a pretty clear and precise sort of set of points where your hand begins and where it ends. So the space between your fingers is very clearly distinct from the fingers themselves. Okay? That's probably uncontroversial. Yeah? So what I'm going to ask you to do is keep that hand where it is, and actually then close your eyes and feel that hand. Bring awareness to that hand from within. So bring awareness to the feelings and sensations that you identify as hand. I don't mean think about your hand, I mean actually kind of become intimate with the sensations that go with this hand, this thing we call hand. And just sit with that for a bit. What I'm going to suggest, I'm going to ask now is, can you say without looking, with that experience of hand, that you can tell as precisely where the hand ends and where it begins as you could when you were looking at it? Are the boundaries between hand and not hand as clear as they were? So with your awareness, try to kind of feel around the edges of your fingers and see if you can notice exactly where they end without looking. So where are the boundaries? And then if you haven't already, sort of press your fingers together. So press your forefingers together so that they're all in contact. And having done that, can you identify where one finger begins and the next finger ends, or vice versa? So look really closely, or attend really closely rather. Okay, so you can put your hand down now. All right, so let's expand that a little bit. So let's get, well, if you're in meditation posture or if you're just sitting in a chair, close your eyes again and bring your awareness, as we always say, to the point of contact with the chair, so between your backside and the seat. So again, really attending to what might on the face of it feel quite solid, quite clearly, again, quite clearly delimited, but look closely. And again, can you tell where you end and the furniture you're sitting on begins? And the same you might look at your legs if you're sitting in meditation posture, where they contact the ground, the same question. Is there a clear dividing line? And what can you say the experience is actually like? So again, just allowing your awareness to rest and try and become interested. So explore the sensations, not just your assumptions as to what they're like. Okay, and relax from that. So at ease, as it were. And okay, so we're probably, there seems to be at least some emerging consensus that there are no hard borders in experience between us and the world. Yeah. So I sometimes feel it in terms of energy. The experiences of in the absence of any kind of hard edges or kind of real substance, one's just left with a sense of energy of the body, and it's the bodily experience, even of what we normally take to be solid, as being just a sort of a flux of energy, which I think is really interesting. So so let's just go into that a little bit more. So we'll try and take that out to more of the body. So from that point of supposed solidity, which is all actually kind of fuzzy, so bringing your awareness up, sort of bringing awareness into the rest of your upper body. And in that experience, again, is there anything actually solid and clearly delineated? You might think that, for instance, if your hands are on top of one another, that there's a firm border, firm delineation, but is there? Again, look. Or the contact between your skin and your clothing. Is there a line? Or just emerging? And then bringing awareness maybe to the skin. I don't know, the skin of your face, where the interface between you and the surrounding air. And this is quite subtle, so you may need to pay some attention. But again, can you tell where the face leaves off and the surrounding air begins? Is there anything solid or truly resistant, as it were, in your bodily experience at all? Anything hard and clearly defined? So is it possible to say that you end and not you begins at any particular point? Or do you just kind of almost radiate out into the room to some undefined point? Just shading into the surroundings. And we're going to add in other perceptions. So any sounds in the room. So I can hear the whirring of my computer. But where is that happening in relation to me? This indefined me that's shading into the rest of the room. Is it outside me? Separate? Is it in my body? Where is it in relation to what I call me? And remember, we're looking for actual experience here and not some idea that we've received. Stuff about the brain or anything like that. So is there a sense of this sound or whatever just taking place within a kind of expanded sense of me? Okay, and then relaxing out of that. So any thoughts about that? There are no right or wrong answers, by the way.
I find these things quite difficult.
Yeah.
Because my experience is definitely influenced by convention.
Yes.
And what I've learned. So it takes an awful lot of letting go of that to get anywhere with these things.
Sure.
But I do get a sense of it, the merging that you're talking about. I do get a sense of that.
Well, if nothing else, it's just asking the question. Yeah. It's good to sort of question our assumptions about, the precision with which we end. Yeah. So and it's interesting you should say it's convention, because convention is very strong, isn't it?
Yes.
But of course, I end with my skin and everything's out there, or it's all electrons in the brain, or electrical activity in the brain, or whatever it is. I mean, none of which has any bearing on experience at all.
No, I've done loads of this stuff with Tejananda, and I always find it difficult.
Yeah,
but it's getting easier.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I'm getting to be able to see it a bit.
Yep.
But it's very interesting stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Well, good. Yeah, we'll move this on a little bit more. So, got our eyes open now. So you might just want to sit in your meditation posture. Just looking around at the space that you're in. You may get a sense of its atmosphere, like a room has a particular feeling that might be sort of feels familiar, probably. And there are objects in it. And again, where are those objects? Where is this happening in relation to me and myself? Where's the boundary between me and the objects I can see and the atmosphere I can sense? And don't worry if you can't make much of this. Again, as I say, it's just asking questions, really. If you don't have a very strong experience of what I'm talking about, it's not a problem. Is there any sense of kind of expansion or relaxation of boundary with all this sense information? Anyway, I thought that you can see why I was nervous now, probably, because this is all quite, it's sort of not necessarily that easy to access. But some sort of sense, coming away, if nothing else, with some sort of sense or being the possibility that we're not as defined and kind of strictly separate from our environment as we might think. So it's worth sort of just, dedicating a little attention to that every now and again. So we're going to come on to the sort of metta aspect now, right? So when I'm teaching meditation, I tend to talk in terms of the heart space. I don't really like heart center. I've sometimes said heart center, but the problem I have with center is if there's a center, there's also a periphery. So it suggests there's like me in here, kind of like, and this at the center of things, and everything else is sort of out there at some peripheral and arranged around me, so to speak. But with heart space, what I like is that it's space. It's not delimited in that way, And one of the interesting things about space is that it's only limited by objects. So if you could imagine the universe being completely emptied of all of its objects, then space would be completely sort of undefined, and it would be meaningless to talk in terms of its limits. So when I think of the heart space, I tend to think of it in that way: is that the heart space is only really limited by the vessel of our imagination. It's only really our imagination that puts boundaries and borders on it. So I'm going to we're going to do just a little bit more, and we're going to bring a friend into this practice. Okay, so you go back into meditation posture. So you bring into mind the room that you're in, and then bring to mind a good friend and have them sort of sitting facing you. So imagine they're sitting opposite you. So, really attending, as it were, you bring in a bit of awareness, a bit of mindfulness to this friend, really trying to see them. To feel their presence, to fill them out in your mind's eye. So introducing a friend, as it were, into this open space without a clearly boundaried you. And what happens emotionally? What happens in terms of your sense of space and spaciousness? And where is that person in relation to you? Are they in your mind? Are they inside your body? Where are they? Are they outside you? Where are they? Just be sitting there opposite you, smiling, obviously enjoying your company. And can you get a sense of their actual being in this open space? What we sometimes call felt sense or felt presence. And perhaps this is the heart space, this open space that opens up, which this person is in with us, so to speak. Being embraced by our hearts. And they're coming out of that in your own time. They can always stick around, be there with you. Okay, would anyone like to say how that was? Yeah, Carolyn. So I was on pinned view before, so I couldn't see if people had their hands up, so I do apologise. Carolyn.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that really remarkable, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I've been holding this person in my mind all day because they're ill at the moment and they're a long way away from me.
Yeah.
So I'd been holding them in my mind. And once you started the exercise, it just happened immediately. This space opened up, warm, just this great big warm space, so there was no boundary between me and them.
Yeah.
And I became aware of how differently I'd been holding them in my mind during the day in a more sort of conceptual, if you like, way. I was creating pictures of them.
Yes.
And there was very much I was boundaried and he was boundaried.
Yeah.
But as soon as I started the exercise, maybe I'd laid the groundwork during the day. There was just two of us, well, one of us in this, and it was really supportive. Actually, it felt incredibly supportive. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting and very good to hear, because it's kind of what I'm aiming at, is that sense that you know we have this heart space that isn't ours, but it's a space in which we can then kind of move towards other people and meet them fully and experience them as much more real. I mean, I've got this vague memory of my early experience of the Metta Bhavana, that you sort of stick up a picture of somebody in your mind, and you kind of go, "May you be well, may you be happy," and it's almost as if you're trying to kind of talk yourself into a relationship with this picture, and all the whole time checking back, how do I feel about this person? So it ends up kind of coming back to you and how you feel. So rather than being kind of connected with them, in a sense, you can always become more separated, because you're then concerned with how you're feeling about them. And as you say, you know, you can be, it's like an image that you're holding, which you can be disconnected from. Yeah. As opposed to this entering into relationship in this open space of the heart.
Yeah. Can I just add one thing? It felt like it was helping them too. I felt like there was something going to them.
I remember an order member called Jayaratna, who had a very, very good friend, another order member called Chakupala, who died sadly. But I remember Jayaratna was saying that he was doing the Metta Bhavana for Chakupala, and Chakupala sort of spoke to him and said, "Were you doing the Metta for me?" He said, "Yes, I was." It was because it was so kind of, the communication is so open that Chakupala could actually feel it.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not? Yeah. Well, who's to say that there isn't a real relationship with that person that arises through through the strength of the intention and the strength of our imagination?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Good. Thanks, Carolyn. Well, I think that's right. I think one's experience of spaciousness can change quite a bit if you do the metta practice and really engage the imagination, which is kind of what I've been encouraging us towards. As I've said, if all of this is completely passing you by, and it's not really kind of working for you, that's fine. Again, it's just a question of asking. It's about asking those questions of experience, really. Yeah. Shradaba, to unmute yourself.
Yeah. There's something for me about it being the felt experience.
Yeah.
As opposed to the cognitively constructed thought, me, them.
Yes.
And the felt sense enables me to open and expand and become more expansive and to absorb the friend. So it's the felt sense that makes the difference for me.
Yes. And that's definitely, well, it's the product of emotion and imagination, isn't it? You know, in some ways, if you've got a really good friend and you naturally feel very well disposed towards them, it helps to make them more real in the imagination. The tricky bit, of course, is when you come to the neutral person, for instance. How do you then cultivate the same? How do you bring them to life in the same way? Because you've got less invested. And that can be a more difficult question. But maybe you can talk a bit about that if we go into breakout groups for, I don't know, say 20 minutes. So let's go into a little, well, just over 20-minute Metta Bhavana practice. So just tuning back into ourselves. And getting a sense of whether we feel kind of contracted, boundaried, or a bit more spacious. And bringing awareness into the heart space. To that place where our emotions play out. Our general emotional landscape. Again, does that space does it feel a bit contracted? Or is there a sense of openness? We're contracted, can we let go a little bit? Move towards that experience with kindness, empathy for ourselves. Opening up a bit of space around any unpleasant feelings. You don't have to identify with them. then inviting into that heart space our good friend from before, perhaps. Sensing their presence, their being with us. Just allowing any naturally expansive, positive emotion to arise. And open to receiving the same from them. So the heart space doesn't have to be limited to this body, but can open out between us, around us and our friend. A space of mutual kindness and appreciation. And then opening up or reaching out with heart and imagination to a person we don't know well, have no strong feelings for. Somebody in this Sangha meeting, perhaps. Allowing their life also for them to be embraced in this open, mutual space. And getting a sense of their presence as a real person who's breathing, who wants to be happy and to avoid suffering, who's having a particular experience right now. Opening up to that. And inviting in someone we find difficult. Acknowledging any contraction, difficult feelings. try to really see the person, to get a sense of them. There's also wanting to be happy, free of difficulty. Using imagination to bridge the gap, to see that we're not so very different. So bringing together ourselves and the good friend, the person we don't know, feelings for particularly, and the person we find difficult, in a kind of shared space of concern and care. and opening up the heart space to more and more people, the people on this call, the people around us. All at the center of their universe, all wanting to be well and happy and to connect and not to suffer. That are moving out like a golden wave or the rays of the sun falling on all beings. So I ask Jayaratna if he would be so good as to lead us in the Dhamma Palangata as usual.
Thanks, Akasaraja. Thank you for this evening. Vajrapriya, for your technical skills. I can see you trying to find the words to the Last Vandana. And here they are. Okay, the verses that protect the truth. So the verses that protect us through the coming week. The words of the Buddha. The Dhamma Palangata. In unison. Sabapapasa akaranam kusalasa upasampada
Sachita paryodapanam etam buddhana sasanam Tamang chare sucharitam nanandu charitam chare Hamachari sukham seti asming loke paramicha natavata tamadaro yavata bahupasati yocha apang pisutvana tamang kayena pasati Save tamadaro hoti o tamang napamajati. Nati me saranang anyang, buddho me saranang varang, etena sachavachena, hotu me jayamangalang. Nati me saranang anyang, Tamo me saranang varang, etena sachavachena, hotu me jayamangalam. Nati me saranang anyang, sangho me saranang varang, etena sachavachena, hotu me jayamangalam. Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dhammaya, Namo Sanghaya, Sadhu, Sadhu, Sadhu.